It's February 1945 and World War II is grinding to a slow and brutal close. In Europe, the Allies are pushing deep into Western Germany and the Soviet forces are closing in from the east, and the Nazis are on the ropes. In the Pacific, however, Japanese forces were still fighting ferociously. Despite a clear weakening of their position across the Pacific theater in preceding months, Japan's historic military doctrine of no retreat and no surrender meant they continued to fight with the same relentless energy they'd shown since entering the war back in 1941. But the Allies were making inroads in the Pacific as well, with Japanese forces across the region becoming increasingly fragmented as supply lines were disrupted by enemy forces. At this stage of the game, however, the Japanese were still in control of a stretch of land known as Ramrey Island. Ramrey sat just off the coast of Burma, in the Bay of Bengal. It had been taken by Japanese forces in 1942 and occupied ever since. Now, initially, it had just been a big humid patch of swamp and mangrove, but its position, both in terms of ease of access to the bay and the mainland, along with its flat terrain which made it perfect for building air bases, made it a strategic gem. The Japanese had turned it into something of an operational hub, and so encroaching British forces knew that Ramrey would be critical to take in the Allied forces' bid for victory in the Pacific. By taking Ramrey, not only would they deprive Japan of all of these things, but acquire them for their own benefit. And thus, Operation Matador was born, with British forces moving to secure Ramrey Island before making further advances into Burma to cut off Japanese supply lines. So the Brits land and the Japanese dig in. An intense battle ensues, and for a while, it's a classic jungle skirmish. Mud, mosquitoes, mayhem. But the British slowly start to gain ground, and as the sun begins to set, the Japanese garrison of roughly 1,000 men find themselves boxed in, completely surrounded, but for the large mangrove swamp at their backs. Remembering that age-old doctrine, instead of surrendering, the Japanese decide to make a break for it, through the swamp under the cover of darkness, with the intention of regrouping and reorganizing on the other side to figure out their next play. So, orders are given and 1,000 men start streaming into the swamp, moving slowly in the moonlight so as to avoid giving away the game. Now, at face value, it's not a terrible idea, and the Japanese weren't exactly flush with options. The problem is that the mangrove swamp was home to a large population of saltwater crocodiles. These are apex predators, hunting machines that can grow up to 20 feet in length and weigh in excess of a ton. And the issue for these soldiers was that at this stage of proceedings, following almost 4 years of Japanese occupation of the island, Ramrey had been supporting thousands of soldiers. Even before supply lines had been disrupted, the Japanese troops had been hunting the island's population of wild pigs, birds, and fish for food, and populations were now dwindling. These were populations that had previously kept Ramrey's crocodiles well fed, but as things stood now, these animals were absolutely famished. So when a stream of men poured into the swamp just after dark, many of them injured and bleeding, Ramrey's crocs took note. According to reports from British troops stationed not too far from the swamp's edge, what followed next was chilling. At first, it was a series of singular incidents. There'd be a blood-curdling scream that tore through the darkness, some frenzied splashing, panicked shouting from those in close proximity, maybe a few bursts of gunfire, and then silence. Rinse, repeat, until finally, British soldiers report the swamp became a fully fledged frenzy as hundreds of crocs ambushed hundreds of men, and the night became a chorus of splashes and screams. When the sun came up the next morning, what the British encountered was grim. Bodies half submerged, scattered limbs in amongst the mangroves, the aftermath of something primal. And out of the 1,000 Japanese soldiers who entered the swamp, only 20 were ever captured by the British. The rest were never seen again. The 1968 edition of the Guinness Book of World Records listed the Ramrey Island massacre as having held the record for most human fatalities from a crocodile attack. And to this day, what happened that night on Ramrey Island remains one of the most chilling and bizarre episodes in the history of warfare, and stands as a grim reminder that sometimes the most terrifying enemy of all isn't even human. For more epic tales from the War Stories archive, hit that subscribe button to enlist today. Then, pick one of the stories on screen to select your next mission. Over and out, soldier.